Bread is up 24%, butter is up 37%, baby formula is up 30%, flour is up 38%, and eggs are up 46%, and many items are up at much higher rates than that. Now Kamala is reportedly proposing communist price controls. She wants price controls.
What are you going to do?
And if they worked, I'd go along with it too, but they don't work. They actually have the exact opposite impact and effect. But it leads to food shortages, rationing, hunger, dramatically more inflation. Their Inflation Reduction Act, by the way, was a disaster. It's what caused the inflation. Their Inflation Reduction Act.
What's his solution? He keeps saying he's going to cut prices.
It wasn't really for inflation that they did it. They don't know why they did it, but they named it the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a very nice name. Got approved based on that. Unfortunately, people didn't understand it. I understood it. I said that's going to cause tremendous inflation, and it did, among other things like energy. She's running on the Maduro plan. We call it the Maduro plan, like something straight out of Venezuela or the Soviet Union. Since March of 2022, the average middle-class household has lost $33,000 in wealth. How about that? $33,000. That's average. In July alone, 350,000 people were added to the unemployment rolls. It's a lot of people. 350,000 people added to the unemployment rolls. Virtually 100% of the net job creation in the last year has gone to migrants. You know that? Most of the job creation has gone to migrants. In fact, I've heard that substantially more than beyond the number of 100%. It's a much higher number than that, but the government hasn't caught up with that yet. But virtually right now, as of the time they did this, virtually 100% of the net job creation in the last year has gone to migrants. Harris gave work permits and Social Security numbers to more than 3 million illegal immigrants to steal jobs from Americans. So think of that. And, you know, they're having a lot of problems with Social Security.
More than 100% of the jobs created went to migrants.
It'll be a bankruptcy of the entire system, probably the nation itself.
They're taking over jobs.
You don't have to imagine what a Kamala Harris presidency would be, because you're living through that nightmare right now, and it is a nightmare. It's a nightmare. And you're going to stop inflation, but we're going to have a crash, and we're going to have a crash like a 1929 crash if she gets in. You saw a gentleman yesterday who got up, one of the top analysts in the world, frankly.
This is another argument that doesn't make any sense, because, like, you're saying if she gets in, you're saying that she's destroyed the country, but if she also gets in, you're going to see a crash. And what doesn't make sense about it is that you can't, while attributing the failures of this administration to Kamala Harris, you can't then turn around and be like, and she's going to be worse. She's going to be somehow different. Like, it makes no fucking sense.
When I left office, I handed Kamala and crooked Joe Biden a surging economy with no inflation. Gasoline had reached $1.87 a gallon. We actually had many months where it was lower than that, but we hit 187, which was a perfect place, an absolutely beautiful number.
Bro.
Real income surged by more than $4,200 a year. Harris and Biden blew it all up. And if Kamala wins the election, the worst is yet to come. You'll have a real problem. Economists are laughing. They can't even believe this is happening to our country. And she wants to change a free enterprise type country into a communist type country. That's what she knows. And from her state, she destroyed San Francisco. She destroyed, as the Attorney General, she destroyed California along with Gavin Newsom. San Francisco, you know, was a great city 15 years ago. Now it's considered unlivable. You can't live there.
I feel bad.
And what they've done to that.
His heart is not in it, Chad. He's just like reading from not even a teleprompter, but like papers in front of himself.
They had a recent article, and I didn't know this, but you're allowed to rob a store as long as it's not more than $950. Has everyone ever heard of that? You can rob a store, and you have these thieves going into stores with calculators calculating how much it is. Because if it's less than $950, they can rob it and not get charged. That was her. She said that a 70 to 80% tax rate is, quote, a bold idea that should be discussed and studied. 70 to 80%. She co-sponsored legislation to abolish.
I think there's something to be said about the fucking water hose of just like lies. I don't know the I don't know how effective it is, but it must be to a certain degree. Especially if you repeat it long enough. Like every single thing he's saying is just false.
To take away your private health care. There are many people.
Literally every single thing he said is false. It's so
spend a lot of
crazy.
money on private health care. Under her, you're not going to have private health care plans anymore.
Lucky for us, I guess, and the American population in general, that people are too stupid to like listen to him and more so pay attention to the aura. When he's absolutely delivering this poorly, people will be more focused on the fact that he's not in it. Like his
Now,
heart
she
is
could
not in it.
change. No tax on tips. All of a sudden, out of the blue, she comes out. That was months ago I said that. And she came out and she said, no tax on tips. She could have at least said, you know, President Trump had some great ideas, but one of the ideas was no tax on tips. I think it would have been nice, and people would have accepted that. But she just came out like it was hers, and she never had. In fact, just the opposite. The IRS is all set up to really go after people that make tips. And they passed legislation and signed executive orders making it really on waiters, waitresses, and that was very recently. That was just before I made the proposal. They were really going after people. So they're lying when they say that, you know, this is what they want to do, because their legislation, which everyone knows, and their executive orders were extremely tough. They also put 88,000 new IRS agents in that can go and harass everybody. She wants to close dozens of existing power plants, causing rollbacks of power in our country. You're going to have brownouts, blackouts, the likes of which you've never seen, and plunging millions and millions of people into poverty. That's going to put them into poverty, and they're not going to have heat. They're not going to have air conditioning. She wants to close dozens of existing power plants, so maybe she'll change that too. But she's got a lot to change. Almost everything she's ever said, she's got to change. Nobody's ever seen, and that's why we're here. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. They're bringing people from mental institutions and insane asylums into the United States, and their population for the mentally ill is way down. They're in the United States. They're dumping them in the United States. They're driving them through a border that's totally open. We stopped them. We didn't let it happen. And when I first came into office, you know this story, that President Obama at the time had no way of getting them back. And I said, I want to get all of the MS-13 in particular.
There's something very funny about like Venezuelan migrants that come into this country being routinely called a rapist, drug dealing murderer by Donald Trump, and then still turning around and like wanting to vote for Donald Trump. And half the reason why they literally had to come to this country is because of Donald Trump's sanctions on Venezuela. So it's like actually crazy. He just keeps calling them and drug dealers and murderers and mental asylum escapees, and they're like, yeah, I love Donald Trump, I'm gonna vote for him.
And the $750 million now is billions of dollars because Biden increased it very substantially. He thinks by sending them money they're going to send fewer people into our country. How stupid is that? So they're giving them $2.5–3 billion. The 750, not only did he give it, I didn't even
if
pay
you
after
believe
they made the
any
call
of the things that he has said so far,
badly for so many years, we're not going to
you are literally the dumbest person on the planet.
Now they've given him situation in China with President Xi, who I know very well. Had a very good relationship until COVID came in, but that was a fence too far. But we had a great relationship, and Kerry would go up there and he'd leave so happy. But they don't do anything. They just talk. They said, "Oh yeah, we're going to do that. Oh, as soon as we get to it." In the meantime, they're building a coal plant every week. But now I hear it's 2 coal plants a week, and we're dying for energy. We don't have energy, and they're getting set for the AI because they're going to create so much electricity, and we're not going to be able to do it. But you'll do it if I have it, because that's an emergency. We have to be able to compete with China and other countries that are able to.
He's saying he has to compete with China. That's why we got to do coal. But also simultaneously, he wants to compete with China by putting tariffs, and also hates EVs.
Germany, as you know,
China is
went
like
a little bit like
the
us,
American
and that was
market
the
by
end
a
of
lot.
envelope. Germany was going to fail. So why are we following these countries that tried it and failed? And they're smart countries. They tried it, they failed. Why are we doing this? Why aren't we creating great energy plants, great sources of energy, instead of playing this game with wind that is ruining everything, killing all your birds, destroying the fields, all these gorgeous fields. You got windmills all over the place, and you have birds. You want to see a bird cemetery? Just go under a windmill. You see thousands of birds dead. The bald eagle, if you kill an eagle, they put you in jail for years.
I do think he actually hates windmills for this reason, by the way. Like, I don't think he's
nothing happens to the people. No.
I don't think he's being disingenuous when he talks about the bird genocide.
Like,
I think in his mind, literally, he hates windmills for that reason.
You can't destroy your country over it. You just can't do that. Elon endorsed me strongly, most powerful endorsement. He said it 3 or 4 times the other night during our little chat, a chat that was very well listened to and attended. We know that, right? It broke every single record, I think, in history. And he's a great guy. But I told him, I said, I have one problem.
Record of his,
I'm all for the electric car,
all
but
of them.
It's a very small percentage. I think the electric car is incredible. I think what you've done is incredible. But people are going to want, some people are going to want gasoline-propelled cars. They're going to want hybrids. They're going to want other types of cars. And Elon, they're going to have to do that. And he understands that fully. And I think he was amazed by this electric vehicle mandate. They want it for trucks too, fuel efficient. And now we build apartments in the trucks, sir. And you would be proud to stay in those apartments. And then I say, I don't know if I would. I know exactly what he meant. Those big, he said, it's incredible, the trucks. I said, who builds the best truck? He didn't tell me. He said, they all do. You have 4 companies, 5 companies. They all do, sir. They build great ones. He said, but for 50 years, they got better. Every year. I started off with 1 truck. I said, how many trucks do you have now? 27,000. I said, 27,000, and all big ones. He's the biggest. This is the biggest. biggest. He said, for 50 years I've been buying, and every single year they got better, more efficient, stronger. He said, if they make us buy electric trucks, we will go back 70 years because the truck is worse than the one we had 50 years ago. One other thing, the truck is heavier and the battery is much larger than the tanks. And the battery would take up about half of the payload. Think of that. The truck it weighs 2.5 times more than a normal truck fired up by diesel.
It's 25% heavier. And he didn't understand what that means because he doesn't get percentages. And he meant like, oh, like 25% heavier. That's why it's 2.5 times bigger. I'm not kidding. I'm almost certain that someone told him 25% heavier, and he literally went with it and was like, oh, it's like 2.5 times heavier.
We're going to open up tracts of federal land for housing construction. We desperately need housing for people who can't afford what's going on now.
He's
and
right
when we
about
open
that.
it up and we take off some of the restrictions and regulations.
I
You
don't
know,
know
in
about all
California,
that.
50% the cost of a house is regulations. They have to adhere to regulations that bring
I
the
don't know about
cost of the
that.
house up by 50%. We have
God damn it,
tremendous.
dude. It took like literally 2 seconds for him to say something correct and then immediately flip it and say something fucking insane. He said we're
Say
going to
that. I'm
greatly
not
increase
sure
the
that
supply
you're
of
necessarily
houses.
as much
Fine,
into it, but
great,
they are.
awesome.
And I will say that.
And then immediately
often,
followed it
very
up by,
often,
yeah, we're going to
we
make it
have,
with like
problems
clay.
with supply
Okay, we're
chains
going to make
where
Play-Doh fucking
I'm
houses.
waiting. And I just want to end by saying we have tremendous potential in this country. We can do amazing things and we can do them fast. We have to get the criminals out. We have to get them out immediately and fast and tough. We're going to rely on our local police. Our local police law enforcement has been so incredible. And they know. Somebody said, how will you get them out? How will you know? The local police know the name and serial number and middle name and last name and where they come from of every single bad guy that's come into our country. And we're going to rely on local police, and we're going to make sure that they have immunity from prosecution because, frankly, our police are treated horribly. They're not allowed to do their job. You know that better than anybody. They're not allowed to do their job. If they were allowed to do their job, we wouldn't have cities that have crime rates. You look at Chicago. On the 4th of July weekend in Chicago, think of this. 117 people were shot and 17 died. Afghanistan isn't anything like that.
I'm not kidding when I say I don't know what more amenities we can give the police. I guess like the only way you can move the needle in the direction of like offering more freedoms to the police is like if you start prosecuting start prosecuting people for saying mean things about the police is like a hate crime.
But why? He said, do you send me a picture of my home?
Do Americans care about foreign policy? I don't know if you noticed it or not, but Donald Trump almost always only talks about foreign policy about on the terms that he would be the peace candidate. So Americans don't really give a shit about foreign policy overall, especially when it's like really nerdy shit. Like, oh yeah, we did NATO. We brought Finland into NATO. Like no one cares. But Donald Trump always says there was no wars under my watch, which is a lie. There was no new wars under my watch, which I guess that's not technically a lie. And that I'm going to put an end to all the wars that are happening right now. That in and of itself is the only way in which Americans do care about foreign policy, which is just like, yeah, I don't really give a shit. Why are we spending so much money on like random nonsense around the world? Like we should spend it on ourselves. So like on that front, he's not wrong. He does a good job of routinely just like lying about how peaceful he was and will continue to be. This is something that Democrats should pay attention to and try to identify with and maybe actually talk about. You know, pretty silly that Democrats have become the warmongering party and have like adopted that position, weirdly enough.